He didn't cry when his mother died. He chose revenge instead. The first thing Matteo De Luca remembers is the sound. Not the gunshots. Not the shouting. The sirens. They cut through the night like something alive, loud, desperate, accusing. He was 14, barefoot on cold marble, staring at the front doors of the De Luca estate as men rushed in and out with weapons drawn. His father's voice echoed somewhere behind him, issuing orders in a tone that meant no one would disobey. But Matteo couldn't move. Because on the driveway, beneath flashing blue lights, his mother lay still. Her white dress was no longer white. He waited for her to sit up, to smile, to say it was dramatic nonsense. She didn't. A paramedic knelt beside her, pressing hard against her chest. Another shook his head slowly, almost respectfully. The world didn't explode. It didn't shatter. It narrowed. Down to a single truth. She wasn't breathing. Matteo stepped forward, but a guard held him back. "Don't," the man whispered. "Don't what? Don't see? Don't feel? Don't remember?" Too late. Across the driveway stood Luca Romano, his father's most trusted advisor. His suit was untouched by blood, his expression tight but controlled. He met Matteo's eyes and gave a slow, solemn nod, as if to say, "This changes everything." It did. Inside the house, the air smelled like gunpowder and fear. Matteo's father stood in his study, staring at a document on his desk. His hands were steady, too steady. "They signed it," his father muttered. Matteo stepped closer. A contract lay open under the lamp, an alliance deal. Territory negotiations, a signature at the bottom. Rossi. Matteo didn't fully understand politics or power yet, but he understood blame. The name burned itself into him. "Was it them?" he asked. His father didn't answer immediately. He looked older in that moment, grief pressing into his shoulders. "Yes," he said finally. "The Rossis betrayed us." Something hardened inside Matteo. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and precise, like a lock clicking into place. The funeral came and went in a blur of black suits and controlled condolences. Matteo stood beside his father and accepted murmured apologies from men who would kill for them without hesitation. He didn't cry. He watched. He memorized faces. He noticed who avoided eye contact, who whispered too long, who seemed almost satisfied. Luca remained close to his father, whispering strategy even before the burial ended. "Retaliation must be calculated," Luca advised. "Not emotional." Matteo stored that away. Calculated, not emotional. That night, alone in his bedroom, Matteo opened his mother's jewelry box. Inside was a small silver cross and a folded photograph of the three of them at the Amalfi Coast. She had written something on the back. "Choose love when you can." He stared at the words until they blurred. Love didn't protect her. Love didn't stop bullets. Love didn't stop betrayal. Revenge, though? Revenge felt solid. Predictable. Earned. Downstairs, his father met with the inner circle. Voices rose. Plans formed. Territories discussed like chess pieces. And Luca, always composed, suggested they wait. Build strength. Strike when the Rossis least expected it. Matteo listened from the staircase. Patience. Precision. Power. He would grow into all three. Years later, when the De Luca Empire expanded beyond Naples, when politicians owed favors and rivals lowered their eyes, people would call Matteo ruthless. They would say he was born cold. They were wrong. He wasn't born that way. He became it the night the sirens took her. And every decision after that traced back to one signature. Rossi. He didn't know yet that the ink on that page was a lie. He only knew one thing. One day, he would make them feel what he felt standing on that marble floor. Helpless. Aria Rossi hated the way people said her last name. Softly, like it carried a warning. She preferred the children at the hospital. They didn't care who her father was. They didn't lower their voices when she entered a room. They only cared whether she brought sketchbooks. On Wednesdays and Fridays, she volunteered in the pediatric wing of a Milan hospital. She painted butterflies on ivy poles and superheroes on plaster casts. She tied her long dark hair into a loose braid so it wouldn't fall into her face while she worked. Today, a little girl with leukemia held Arya's wrist and asked, "Are you famous?" Arya smiled gently. No, it wasn't entirely true, but it was the version she liked. Her father insisted she be protected. Chauffeur-driven cars, private entrances, discretion. "You don't need to know about the business," he would say whenever she asked questions. The business. A word that meant meetings behind closed doors. Men with sharp suits and sharper eyes. Phone calls that ended abruptly when she walked into the room. She learned early not to push, but she listened. And lately, what she heard unsettled her. DeLuca expansion is aggressive. They're buying ports. They're freezing assets. One name repeated itself in tense conversations. Matteo DeLuca. She'd seen his photograph once in an international finance article. Dark suit, controlled expression, eyes that didn't smile. He didn't look like a monster. He looked disciplined. That frightened her more. One evening, she returned home to find her father pacing his office. Papers scattered, his tie loosened. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "Are we at war?" He stopped pacing. "We are adjusting." That's not an answer. He softened when he looked at her. He always did. "You don't need to worry." But she did. Because the house felt different. Guards doubled, staff whispering, her father sleeping less. And then the first account froze. It happened silently, one moment normal, the next inaccessible. Allies stopped answering calls. Suppliers withdrew contracts. Within weeks, cracks spread through the Rossi empire like fractures in glass. Arya confronted him again. "What did you do?" His expression hardened in a way she'd never seen directed at her before. "I did what was necessary." For us? For survival. That word lingered. Survival meant threat. Threat meant someone powerful enough to challenge them. Matteo. The name hovered between them, unspoken. The collapse came at midnight. Federal agents stormed the estate with warrants and cameras. Staff lined against walls, documents seized, hard drives removed. Her father stood still as they cuffed him. "Trust me," he told her as they led him away. She grabbed his arm. "Tell me what's happening!" But he only repeated it. "Trust me." Outside, reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs blinded her. Someone yelled, "Rossi Empire falls." Empire. She wanted to scream that she was just a woman who liked restoring art and painting butterflies. But perception doesn't care about preferences. That night, alone in the mansion that suddenly felt too large, a black envelope arrived. No sender. Heavy paper. Inside, a contract. Her breath slowed as she read the name at the top. Matteo DeLuca. A proposal of marriage. Terms outlined like a corporate merger. Asset protection, political stabilization, end of hostilities. In exchange, she would become his wife. Publicly. Permanently. Her hands trembled not from fear. From fury. He had destroyed her father. Now he wanted her as collateral. She expected arrogance. Instead, the final line was simple. Peace requires sacrifice. She stared at it for a long time. Sacrifice. Was she meant to feel noble, trapped, strategic? She didn't know. But for the first time since the raid, she felt something sharp and focused replace helplessness. If Matteo DeLuca thought she would walk into this broken, he didn't know her. And perhaps she didn't know him. But she would. Before she ever said yes. Matteo didn't believe in chaos. Chaos was loud, emotional, unpredictable. He believed in erosion. Slow, patient, inevitable. The fall of the Rossi Empire wasn't an explosion. It was a tightening grip. Contracts quietly redirected. Investors persuaded. Ports acquired. Allies offered better protection under the DeLuca name. By the time federal agents raided the Rossi estate, Matteo had already ensured there would be no one left powerful enough to intervene. He stood in his high-rise office overlooking Naples when the news broke. "Rossi detained on federal charges," the anchor announced. Matteo muted the screen. He expected satisfaction. Instead, he felt still. Luca Romano stepped inside without knocking. "It's done," he said smoothly. "You were right to wait." Matteo nodded once. "Send a statement." Neutral tone. "Of course." Luca hesitated near the door. "And the daughter?" Matteo's jaw tightened. Aria Rossi. He had studied her file carefully. Volunteer work. University records. No direct involvement in operations. Clean financial footprint. An anomaly. "She isn't the target," Matteo replied. "But she is leverage." Matteo didn't answer immediately. Leverage implied weakness, and she didn't seem weak. He remembered seeing her once at a charity gala years ago. She wore a simple navy dress, hair braided loosely over one shoulder, expression distant from the political theater around her. She looked out of place, too human for that world. "Prepare the contract," Matteo said finally. Luca's brow lifted. Marriage? Peace requires legitimacy. And marriage in their world looked cleaner than continued bloodshed. But that wasn't the only reason. Matteo opened his desk drawer and pulled out a copy of the original alliance document. The signature that had justified everything. Rossi. He stared at the ink. He had spent years believing that signature ordered the ambush that killed his mother. Years building toward this moment. And yet, the memory of Aria's hospital volunteer report lingered in his mind. A woman who painted butterflies for dying children didn't align with betrayal. But bloodlines didn't lie. Did they? "Are you certain?" Luca asked gently. Matteo's gaze sharpened. "About what?" "That this ends the war." Matteo leaned back. "It has to." Because if revenge didn't end it, then what had he built all this for? Across the city, Aria sat in her father's abandoned office, the contract spread across the desk like an accusation. She had reread every clause. No romantic language, no manipulation, no threats. Just structure. Protection for remaining Rossi assets. Reduced legal pressure through political alliances. Public unity between the two most powerful syndicates in southern Italy. And her signature required at the bottom. Her father had always kept her separate from the business. But this dragged her directly into it. The door creaked behind her. Her Aunt Sophia entered quietly. "You can't be considering this." "I don't know what I'm considering," Aria admitted. "Marrying him will make you a symbol." "I already am one." Silence settled between them. "You don't know this man," Sophia said. "I don't know what my father did either." That truth hurt more than the proposal. She visited her father the next day. The prison walls were cold, impersonal. He looked older already, exhaustion carved into his features. "They're offering marriage," she said without preamble. His eyes darkened. "No." "Why?" "Because it's not justice, it's humiliation." "Did you sign the deal that night?" she asked softly. He looked away. "I did what I had to." "That's not an answer." Guards signaled that time was ending. "Trust me," he repeated urgently. She stepped back, heart aching. Trust isn't automatic anymore. As she left, frustration replaced grief. If her father wouldn't give her clarity, she would find it herself. That evening, she requested a meeting. Not through lawyers. Directly. Matteo agreed within the hour. The location was neutral. A private room in an upscale hotel overlooking the coast. When she entered, he stood. He didn't smile. He assessed. Up close, he was more imposing than in photographs. Not because of size, but because of stillness. He moved like someone who never wasted energy. "You look different from the headlines," she said calmly. "So do you." They sat. "No theatrics," Matteo began. "This marriage ends retaliation." "You call dismantling my family retaliation?" He met her gaze evenly. "Your father betrayed mine. My father says he didn't." "He would, and you would assume." The tension between them felt less like hatred and more like two mirrors reflecting grief back at each other. "What do you really want?" she asked. "Control," he said honestly. She blinked, surprised. "Control over what?" "The past." Something shifted in her chest at that. "You think marrying me gives you that?" "No," he admitted, "but it prevents further loss." She studied him carefully. He wasn't cruel. He was wounded, and that was more dangerous. If I agree, she said slowly, I do it on my terms. His brow lifted slightly. Which are? No interference with my personal initiatives. Transparency about business decisions that affect me. And if I discover you lied about my father, I didn't. If I discover you did, she repeated, this marriage becomes your biggest mistake. For the first time, something close to respect flickered in his eyes. You're not afraid, he observed. I am, she replied quietly. I just refuse to show it. Silence stretched between them. Outside, the ocean moved in steady waves. Inside, two empires recalibrated. I'll sign, she said finally, not because she trusted him, but because she refused to be a passive casualty. As she stood to leave, Matteo spoke again. You should know something. She paused. I didn't order the arrest. Her breath caught slightly. Then who did? His expression darkened. That, he said, is what I intend to find out. Neither of them noticed Luca watching through the reflection of the glass corridor outside, and neither realized the war wasn't ending. It was shifting, and the most dangerous battles were fought in silence. The envelope felt heavier the second time she held it. Not because of the paper, because of the decision. Arya sat at her father's old desk, the contract illuminated beneath a single brass lamp. Outside, the Rossi estate was unnaturally quiet. Security had been reduced, staff dismissed. The house no longer hummed with authority. It echoed. Her name was already printed beside Matteo's. Arya Rossi. Soon to be Arya De Luca, a merging of bloodlines the media would call historic. Romantic, even. They would never know it was built on suspicion. She traced the final clause again. Marriage to be legally binding and publicly recognized within 30 days. 30 days to transition from daughter of a fallen empire to wife of the man who dismantled it. Her aunt stood near the doorway. You still have time to refuse. Refuse in what? Arya asked quietly. Let loyalists keep dying in small retaliations? Let everything collapse into chaos? This isn't your burden. It became my burden the moment my father stopped telling me the truth. She signed. The pen didn't shake, but her chest did. Across Naples, Matteo received confirmation within minutes. She signed, Luca reported. Matteo stood by the window overlooking the harbor. Ships moved in slow precision below, cargo transferring seamlessly. Just like power. Arrange the announcement, Matteo said. Luca studied him carefully. You seem calm. I am. Most men would feel victorious. Matteo turned slightly. Victory implies satisfaction. And you're not satisfied? Matteo's gaze drifted back to the water. No, because satisfaction would mean certainty. And certainty was slipping. Security must increase, Luca continued. There will be backlash. There always is. Luca nodded, but something unreadable flickered behind his eyes. Matteo didn't notice. The announcement shook Italy's criminal underworld. Headlines framed it as strategic genius. Commentators speculated about reconciliation. Political figures offered carefully worded statements of approval. But inside the Rossi estate, Arya packed her belongings in silence. She left behind childhood trophies, framed photographs, and the faint scent of her mother's perfume that still lingered in certain hallways. The only thing she kept from her father's office was a fountain pen, the same pen he'd used to sign contracts for years. She stared at it before placing it carefully in her bag. If the signature that destroyed them was forged, she would prove it. The wedding was set for the De Luca Cathedral estate overlooking the sea. Security teams coordinated routes. Designers selected flowers. Invitations were sent to politicians, business leaders, and syndicate heads across Europe. It was less a ceremony and more a declaration of power. On the morning of the rehearsal, Arya arrived at the estate for the first time. The architecture was imposing but elegant stone archways, iron balconies, manicured gardens cascading toward the cliffs. It wasn't gaudy. It was controlled. Matteo waited inside the grand hall. When she entered, he dismissed the staff with a subtle nod. For a moment, it was just them. Do you regret it? He asked. It's too early for regret, she replied evenly. He watched her take in the space. You'll have full autonomy within the estate. I don't want autonomy in a cage. His jaw tightened slightly. This isn't a cage. It's a fortress. For protection. From who? The question lingered longer than either expected. Matteo stepped closer, though still maintaining distance. From the instability this marriage will cause. And you? His brow furrowed. What about me? Am I protected from you? The question wasn't accusatory. It was honest. Something softened in his expression, almost imperceptibly. I don't hurt what I claim responsibility for. Claim. Responsibility. Not love. She nodded once. Good. That evening, as final preparations unfolded, Luca walked alone through the estate corridors. He paused outside Matteo's private study. Inside, on the desk, lay the original forged contract. Luca entered silently, retrieving a small flash drive from his pocket. He plugged it into Matteo's computer and transferred a folder labeled Times Archive 2010. A subtle adjustment. A missing file. A slight alteration in metadata. Nothing noticeable to an untrained eye, but enough to erase inconsistencies. When footsteps approached, Luca removed the drive and stepped away from the desk just as Matteo entered. Everything secure? Matteo asked. Completely, Luca replied smoothly. Good. Matteo picked up the alliance document again, staring at the signature. For a split second, doubt flickered. Then it was gone. The night before the wedding, Arya stood alone on the balcony of her assigned suite. The ocean roared below, relentless and dark. She wasn't naive. She understood what this meant. Her name would now be tied permanently to the De Luca Empire. Every decision Matteo made would reflect on her. Every enemy he gained would watch her. And yet, beneath the fear, something unexpected stirred. Curiosity. The man she was about to marry wasn't what she anticipated. He was controlled, yes, ruthless, likely, but not careless, not cruel. There was grief in him, deep and unresolved. She recognized it, because she carried her own. Behind her, a soft knock. Matteo stepped inside without crossing fully into the room. Tomorrow will be loud, he said. If you wish to leave before the ceremony, I won't. He studied her profile against the moonlight. Why? She didn't look at him. Because I refuse to be someone this world moves around. Their eyes met. For the first time, the tension between them didn't feel like opposition. It felt like alignment under pressure. A shared understanding that neither chose the battlefield, but both intended to survive it. Get some rest, Matteo said quietly. As he left, Luca watched from the far end of the corridor. His expression was no longer solemn. It was calculating, because tomorrow the world would celebrate unity. But Luca knew something they didn't. This marriage wasn't ending the war. It was creating the perfect distraction. And distractions made betrayal easier. If love had been invited, it didn't show up. The cathedral estate shimmered under crystal chandeliers and camera flashes. Politicians filled the front rows. Syndicate leaders lined the sides like silent jurors. Every seat represented power recalibrating itself. Arya walked down the aisle in a gown that felt too light for what it symbolized. Lace traced her shoulders. Her hair fell in a controlled cascade down her back. She kept her chin level. Across from her, Matteo waited in a tailored black suit, expression composed, eyes unreadable. The priest spoke of unity, of forgiveness, of new beginnings. None of it fit. When Matteo took her hand, his grip was steady, warm. I do, he said, voice low and even. It wasn't romantic, but it wasn't hollow either. When it was her turn, Arya held his gaze deliberately. I do. Applause filled the cathedral. Cameras captured the kiss that followed, brief, restrained, symbolic. Outside, the ocean crashed against cliffs as if unimpressed by ceremony. At the reception, alliances were negotiated between champagne toasts. Smiles hid calculations. Every handshake carried history. You look calm, Matteo said quietly when they found a brief moment alone near a balcony. Calm is efficient, she replied. A flicker of something approval perhaps crossed his face. You handled this well. I don't collapse in public. He studied her carefully. And in private? She didn't answer. Across the hall, Luca observed them from behind a cluster of guests. His gaze lingered on Arya longer than necessary, not with admiration, with assessment. A phone vibrated discreetly in his pocket. A message flashed. Ready. He slipped it away. The evening progressed without visible disruption. Dances were performed, speeches delivered, the illusion of unity perfected. But when night settled fully and guests began departing, the estate quieted into something more honest. Matteo escorted Arya to the master suite, now theirs. Inside, the room was expansive yet restrained. Dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sea, no excessive decoration. "This is where you'll stay," he said. "You mean we'll stay?" A brief pause. "Yes." The air shifted subtly. There were expectations attached to weddings, especially ones broadcasted across power circles. Matteo removed his jacket slowly. "You don't owe me anything tonight." Her shoulders relaxed a fraction. "I didn't assume I did." He nodded once. He took the couch. She took the bed. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was charged with everything unsaid. Hours later, Arya woke to a distant pop, then another. Gunshots. She sat upright instantly. Matteo was already moving. He crossed the room in seconds, retrieving a firearm from a concealed drawer. "Stay behind me," he instructed. She followed anyway. Security alarms echoed faintly through the halls. Voices shouted downstairs. A guard burst into the corridor. "Perimeter breach." Matteo's jaw tightened. "Casualties?" "One wounded." The attack was contained quickly. The shooters apprehended near the gates. As calm returned, Matteo remained alert, scanning the darkness beyond the estate walls. Arya watched him carefully. He wasn't exhilarated. He was furious. "Who sent them?" she asked quietly. "Someone testing boundaries. Or someone unhappy about the marriage." His eyes flicked toward her. Possibility registered. Downstairs, Luca coordinated with security, issuing rapid instructions. Efficient, controlled. But when he stepped aside to take a private call, his tone lowered. "Yes," he murmured. "Proceed with phase 2. Upstairs, unaware of the layers unfolding beneath them, Matteo locked the suite doors. "You're not safe here," Arya said. "Nowhere is completely safe. And yet you brought me into this." His gaze held hers steadily. "I brought you into protection." She stepped closer, defiant but not reckless. "If this continues, people will think I'm leverage." "You are leverage," he said honestly. The truth landed between them like a blade. "But you're also my responsibility." Responsibility again. Not love. Not partnership. Still, something about the way he said it felt personal. Outside, sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Matteo turned toward the windows, expression sharpening. This wasn't random. And if someone inside his circle had orchestrated it, the marriage wasn't the only thing binding them now. Suspicion was. Morning light didn't soften the tension. The estate moved cautiously. Guards doubled. Security footage reviewed. Reports filed. Arya sat in Matteo's study while he debriefed with his inner circle. "I want names," Matteo said. Luca responded smoothly. "Preliminary interrogation suggests independent actors." "Independent actors don't breach my gates on my wedding night." Luca inclined his head. "Then perhaps someone testing your resolve." Matteo dismissed the others but asked Luca to stay. Arya lingered outside the study doors, listening. "Have you considered," Luca began carefully, "that merging with Rossi blood may provoke instability from within?" "You think she orchestrated this?" Matteo's voice cooled. "I think alliances shift loyalties." Matteo's silence stretched. "Monitor communications," he ordered finally, discreetly. Arya stepped away before the doors opened. Monitor communications. Did that include hers? Later that afternoon, she entered the study alone. The forged alliance contract lay on the desk, slightly askew. She picked it up carefully. Her father had signed documents for decades. She had watched him, the way his hand angled slightly upward at the end of his last name, the pressure marks along the R. This signature was close, but not exact. The slant dipped downward. Subtle. Almost imperceptible. unless you'd grown up watching it. Her pulse quickened. She retrieved her father's fountain pen from her bag and placed it beside the contract. Something wasn't aligning. Footsteps approached. Matteo entered quietly. "You're studying it," he observed. "Yes. You think it's fake. I think it's wrong." He crossed the room slowly. It was verified. By who? A pause. By Luca. The name hung heavily. "Did you personally compare it to older documents?" she pressed. "No." "Then do it." Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was urgent. He studied her face, searching for deception. He found none. He moved behind the desk and opened a locked drawer, retrieving archived contracts bearing the Rossi signature. They laid them side by side. Silence filled the room as he examined the angles carefully. A muscle in his jaw tightened. The difference was slight, but present. "This could be variation," he muttered. "It could," she agreed. "But it could also be forgery." Their eyes met. For the first time, doubt pierced Matteo's certainty. "If this is false," he said slowly, "everything changes." "Yes. And if it's true? Then I live with the consequences." He held her gaze longer than necessary. "You'd accept that?" "I accept truth," she replied, "not manipulation." The honesty unsettled him more than accusation would have. A knock interrupted them. Luca entered, composed as always. "Security footage reviewed," he said. "The attackers were linked to a minor Sicilian faction, likely opportunists." Matteo didn't look away from Arya immediately. "Did you verify the Rossi signature personally?" he asked suddenly. Luca blinked once, almost imperceptibly. "Yes, years ago." "With originals?" "Of course." Matteo nodded slowly. "Good." But something had shifted. After Luca exited, Arya stepped closer. "Do you trust him?" she asked quietly. "I've trusted him since I was a boy." "That doesn't answer the question." Matteo's gaze darkened. Trust. It had cost him once already. Outside the estate walls, alliances recalculated quietly. Inside, a marriage forged in strategy began transforming into something else. Not love. Not yet. But a shared pursuit of truth. And if the signature was forged, then someone had built a war on a lie. And the most dangerous enemy wouldn't be across the battlefield. He'd be standing beside the throne. Luca Romano had perfected invisibility. Not the kind where people forgot he existed, the opposite. He was always present, always reliable, always the calm voice when tempers flared. But true power wasn't loud. It was positioned. He stood in the De Luca security room, reviewing footage from the wedding night breach. Screens flickered with angles of gates, corridors, sniper perches. He rewound a specific frame, paused, zoomed, then deleted it. The footage showed a black sedan idling near the outer perimeter 10 minutes before the breach. A sedan registered to a shell company he controlled. No one else would notice its absence. Upstairs, Matteo examined the alliance contracts again. The difference in signatures was small, almost insulting in its subtlety. He compared pressure points, stroke direction, ink weight. Arya stood beside him, watching in silence. "You see it now," she said softly. Yes. He hated that she was right. Not because she was his enemy, but because it meant he might have been a fool. "There's only one person who verified it," she continued carefully. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. "Luca." Matteo closed the drawer slowly. If he forged it, he would have needed motive. "Power," Arya replied immediately. "That's not specific. Control of you." The bluntness caught him off guard. "Luca's influence depends on war," she added. "War keeps you dependent on strategy, on him." Matteo leaned back, considering. "You think I'm manipulated." "I think you're grieving," she corrected. The word struck harder than accusation. Downstairs, Luca entered the study without knocking. "Apologies," he said smoothly. "New intelligence." Matteo straightened. "Speak." "There are whispers that certain Rossi loyalists aren't pleased with the marriage. We should consider tightening her movements." "Her." Arya felt the shift instantly. "You mean restrict me?" she said coolly. "For safety," Luca replied with faint concern. Mateo's gaze lingered on Luca's expression. Searching, measuring. Aria's movements remain her decision, Mateo said calmly. Luca's jaw flexed almost imperceptibly. As you wish. He turned to leave. Luca, Mateo called. He paused. Bring me the original verification reports from the Rossi contract. I want to review them personally. A fraction of hesitation. Then a nod. Of course. When the door closed, Aria exhaled slowly. He didn't expect that, she murmured. No, Mateo agreed. For the first time in years, Luca wasn't unquestioned, and men who built empires on silent influence rarely reacted well to scrutiny. That night, Luca sat alone in his private office on the lower floor. He opened a locked drawer and removed a thin folder labeled 2010. Inside, the Real Alliance contract. Unsigned. He stared at it for a long moment. He had forged the Rossi signature 12 years ago with meticulous care, enough to ignite suspicion, enough to fuel retaliation. He had orchestrated the ambush that killed Mateo's mother through an intermediary. Ensured blame shifted outward, because a grieving heir was easier to shape than a stable one, and a war-hardened leader leaned heavily on strategic counsel. He hadn't anticipated Aria. He hadn't anticipated that Mateo would look at her and hesitate. That hesitation threatened everything. His phone vibrated. Is Phase 2 confirmed? He asked quietly. Yes, came the reply. Transfer order approved. Good. If Arya sought answers from her father, that conversation would never finish. Arya visited the prison 3 days later. The facility was harsher than before. Guards more rigid, access more limited. Her father entered the visitation room looking thinner, but his eyes sharpened when he saw her. You married him, he said quietly. Yes. Pain flickered across his face. You shouldn't have. I needed access, she replied. To what? To truth. Silence settled heavily between them. She placed a copy of the forged contract against the glass divider. Did you sign this? His jaw tightened. No. The word came without hesitation. Her pulse quickened. Then who did? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Someone inside DeLuca, I tried to warn. The door slammed open. 2 guards entered abruptly. Visit terminated. What? Arya stood. We have 10 minutes left. Transfer order, one guard replied curtly. Transfer where? Her father demanded. High security relocation. Arya's stomach dropped. Who signed it? She asked. The guard avoided her eyes. She caught a glimpse of the paperwork as they escorted her father out. Authorization signature. Luca Romano. Her father tried to speak again as he was pulled away. But the door closed, and the truth was cut mid-sentence. Back at the estate, Arya stormed into Mateo's office without announcement. They transferred him. Mateo stood immediately. Transferred where? They wouldn't say. Who authorized it? She stepped closer. Luca. The air shifted. Mateo's expression darkened dangerously. He wouldn't. He did. She placed the transfer copy on his desk. He read it once. Twice. The signature was authentic. Why wasn't I informed? Mateo muttered. Because someone doesn't want him speaking. Silence pressed in around them. Mateo moved quickly, grabbing his phone. Get me the warden. Now. He paced while waiting for the call to connect. Arya watched him not as an enemy, as a man unraveling a thread he hadn't noticed before. When the call ended, his expression was colder than she'd ever seen. The transfer was expedited through a legal loophole, he said. Pre-approved weeks ago. Before the wedding. Yes. She met his eyes. You see it now. He did. Not fully. But enough. I trusted him, Mateo said quietly. That's how betrayal works, she replied. Before he could respond, alarms erupted again through the estate. Security shouted from the halls. Internal breach. Mateo's instincts snapped into place. He grabbed his weapon. Stay here. I'm not hiding, Arya said firmly. Gunshots echoed from the lower wing. Mateo moved toward the noise. Arya a step behind, despite his protest. They reached the corridor just as guards restrained an intruder. The man wore no insignia, no clear affiliation. But when Mateo knelt and pulled the mask from his face, Recognition flashed. The man worked for one of Luca's private shell operations. Matteo rose slowly. Rage didn't explode. It condensed. He looked down the corridor toward Luca's office. The wedding hadn't ended the war. It had exposed the battlefield. And the enemy wasn't outside the gates. He was inside the walls, watching, waiting, calculating his next move. The intruder was dragged into the interrogation room beneath the estate. Concrete walls, single overhead light, no windows. Matteo stood across from the restrained man, sleeves rolled, expression carved from stone. Arya watched from behind the glass partition despite every instruction to remain upstairs. "Who sent you?" Matteo asked evenly. Silence. The man swallowed hard but kept his mouth shut. Matteo leaned forward slightly. "You breached my home. On my orders, that carries consequences." Still silence. Arya noticed something Matteo didn't at first, the flicker of fear, when Luca entered the observation area behind her. Not fear of Matteo. Fear of Luca. Interesting. Inside the room, Matteo placed a photograph on the table, the black sedan captured before the wedding breach. "You were seen near this vehicle," he continued. The man's eyes shifted involuntarily. Toward the glass. Toward Luca. Matteo followed the movement. A slow realization settled into his posture. He stood upright and walked out of the interrogation room without another word. Luca straightened as Matteo approached. "You should let me handle this," Luca offered smoothly. "You're too personally involved." Matteo stopped inches from him. "I am personally involved," he replied quietly. Their eyes locked. Years of loyalty balanced against emerging doubt. "You've guided this family through every storm," Matteo said. "But lately, storms seem to start near you." Luca's expression remained composed. "You're grieving again. Doubt clouds judgment." "Is that what this is?" "Yes." Matteo studied him for a long moment. Then turned to Arya. "Come with me." They retreated to the upper floor. Inside the study, Matteo shut the door firmly. "He's involved," Arya said immediately. "I know." The admission surprised even him. He moved to the desk and opened a secure channel to his external intelligence contact, someone Luca didn't control. "I want independent verification on every shell company Romano oversees," Matteo ordered, quietly. He ended the call and leaned against the desk. "I built everything with him beside me," he said, voice lower now. "And now?" Arya asked gently. "Now I question every victory." She stepped closer. "You didn't build this alone, and you didn't destroy my family alone either." He met her gaze. "Why are you helping me?" The question was honest, not suspicious. "Because if he forged that signature, he manipulated both of us," she replied. "And I won't be a pawn in someone else's ambition." Silence. Not hostile. Shared. Downstairs, Luca made his move. He entered the interrogation room alone. The restrained man looked up anxiously. "You were careless," Luca said softly. "I didn't say anything," the man whispered. "You didn't need to." Luca stepped closer. "You served your purpose." A suppressed gunshot echoed in the confined space. Upstairs, Arya stiffened. Matteo's eyes darkened. He moved toward the lower level immediately. By the time they reached the room, Luca stood over the body, expression grave. "He lunged," Luca said calmly. "I had no choice." Matteo stared at the scene. Too clean. Too convenient. The only witness was dead. And with him, answers. The war had shifted from open rivalry to silent elimination. And Luca had just erased a liability. Sleep became a luxury neither of them could afford. The estate felt heavier now, like the walls themselves were listening. Matteo reviewed financial records deep into the night. Independent reports began arriving quietly. 3 shell companies traced back to Romano's oversight had received unusual transfers the week before the forged contract surfaced years ago. The amounts weren't large enough to trigger audits, but they were deliberate. "Payments," Arya murmured, reading over his shoulder. "To intermediaries." "Yes." "For what?" Matteo didn't answer immediately. Because he already suspected. Across the room, his phone vibrated. An encrypted message from his external contact. Romano linked to offshore account tied to ambush logistics 2010. Mateo's grip tightened around the device. The room felt smaller. Arya saw the shift in his expression. What is it? He handed her the phone silently. She read the message once, then again. Logistics, she whispered. The night his mother died. The room seemed to tilt slightly. For years, Mateo had built his empire on a single narrative. Rossi betrayal. Rossi blood responsible. And now, the foundation cracked. He sank into the chair slowly, hands clasped tightly. I killed men for this lie, he said quietly. You acted on the truth you were given, Arya replied. That doesn't absolve me. No, but it explains you. Their eyes met again, not as adversaries. As two people standing inside the wreckage of manipulation, a knock interrupted them. Luca entered without waiting. Authorities are requesting a joint appearance tomorrow, he announced, to reinforce stability. Mateo rose slowly. Cancel it. Luca's brow lifted slightly. That may appear unstable. So be it. A subtle tension passed between them. Is there something you wish to discuss? Luca asked carefully. Yes, Mateo replied. Silence thickened. You handled verification of the Rossi contract personally. Correct. Who assisted you? No one. Mateo stepped closer. Then explain the offshore accounts tied to ambush logistics. A fractional pause. Almost imperceptible, but real. I don't know what you're implying, Luca said calmly. I'm not implying. Mateo's voice cooled into something lethal. I'm asking. Arya watched closely. Luca's composure didn't crack, but something colder surfaced beneath it. Careful, Mateo, he said softly. Suspicion destroys empires faster than enemies, and betrayal destroys them permanently. The two men stood inches apart, history balanced on a blade's edge. Luca inclined his head slightly. If you doubt me, he said evenly, prove it. Then he left. The door shut with quiet finality. Arya exhaled slowly. He's cornered, she said. Yes, and cornered men are dangerous. Mateo's gaze shifted toward the window overlooking the sea. For years, I believed I was avenging my mother, he said quietly. And now? Now I may have been avenging a lie. The realization didn't weaken him. It sharpened him, because revenge built from grief was powerful. But justice built from truth was unstoppable. And Luca Romano had just invited him to prove it. The transfer facility was colder than the first prison. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights that hummed faintly overhead. No warmth, no familiarity. Arya sat across from her father again, separated by reinforced glass. He looked more exhausted this time, more urgent. They're moving quickly, he said without greeting. That means he's afraid. Luca? She asked. Yes. The name felt heavier spoken aloud. Tell me everything, she insisted. No protection, no half-truths. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. The alliance contract was legitimate. We negotiated peace that year. DeLuca agreed. I agreed. Then why the ambush? Because someone altered the terms after signatures were drafted. I refused to sign the final amendment. Her pulse spiked. What amendment? A clause shifting port control entirely to DeLuca oversight. It would have weakened us permanently. I refused. And then, 2 weeks later, the ambush happened. Did you tell Mateo? He wouldn't see me. War escalated too quickly. Footsteps echoed behind her. She ignored them. Did you ever sign any version? She pressed. No, he said firmly. I never signed the final document. Her breath caught. The guards approached abruptly. Time's up. We just started, she protested. Immediate termination. Her father's eyes sharpened. Listen to me, he said urgently. The man who benefits most from endless conflict is never the one at the top. What do you mean? Romano handles logistics, shipments, intelligence. He controls the narrative. The guards grabbed his arm. He was present the night of the ambush, her father shouted as they pulled him away. Ask who redirected security that evening. The door slammed shut. Arya stood frozen. Redirected security. That night, she replayed the detail over and over during the drive back to the estate. Redirected security meant premeditation. It meant someone inside DeLuca cleared the path. Matteo waited in the study when she arrived. He read her expression before she spoke. He confirmed it, she said quietly. He never signed. Matteo's jaw tightened. He also said Luca redirected security the night your mother died. Silence swallowed the room. Matteo stared at nothing for several seconds. Because that detail, he remembered it. Security had been reassigned to a secondary dock due to a reported disturbance. A disturbance Luca had informed them about. The pieces aligned slowly, terribly. I gave the order to reassign, Matteo said quietly, but the intel came from him. And without that shift, she asked carefully, the driveway wouldn't have been exposed. The weight of it hit him fully now. He had carried blame outward for years, when it may have been standing beside him. He moved to his desk and opened a secure archive. Old call logs. Security memos. He scanned rapidly. There, he muttered. The disturbance report came from a number later traced to a disposable line, registered under a shell company. One linked in recent reports to Luca's offshore accounts. Matteo closed his eyes briefly. Not in weakness. In clarity. When he opened them again, something fundamental had changed. This ends, he said quietly. Arya stepped closer. How? By making him believe he's still in control. Her brows lifted slightly. You'll confront him publicly? No. His voice lowered. I'll remove him surgically. For the first time since she'd known him, she saw not rage, but precision fueled by truth. And it was far more dangerous. Luca sensed it. He had survived too long not to. The subtle shift in Matteo's tone, the increased distance, the independent audits he hadn't authorized. The king was investigating, and kings who investigate often discover too much. He stood in his private office, pouring a measured glass of scotch. Across from him sat a representative from a rival New York syndicate, discreetly flown in under false pretenses. You're certain he suspects? The man asked. Yes, Luca replied calmly. And your solution? Acceleration. The man leaned back. You'll remove him? No. Luca's eyes darkened slightly. I'll destabilize him. How? Through the only variable he didn't anticipate. His wife. That evening, Matteo called a private meeting with his inner circle, excluding Luca. Arya watched from the balcony above the conference hall. I've uncovered discrepancies in historical logistics, Matteo began evenly. I want full transparency audits on all operations managed by Romano. Murmurs spread across the table. That's unprecedented, one advisor said carefully. So is forgery. The room fell silent. Matteo didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Power shifted subtly in the air. Down the corridor, Luca observed through the glass. He wasn't surprised. He was prepared. Later that night, Arya walked alone through the East Wing garden. She needed air. Needed space to think. She didn't notice the second pair of footsteps at first. The garden lights flickered once, then went dark. Her pulse spiked. She turned. A gloved hand grabbed her arm. She reacted instinctively, twisting sharply and driving her heel backward. The attacker staggered but didn't fall. Quiet, the masked figure hissed. She bit his hand. Hard. He cursed. Footsteps thundered toward them. Security. The attacker shoved her violently to the ground and fled toward the perimeter fence. Guards fired warning shots, but the figure disappeared into darkness. Matteo reached her seconds later. He dropped to his knees beside her. Are you hurt? She shook her head, breath uneven. It was targeted, she said immediately. Not random. His expression hardened. Yes, because Luca had just escalated. Inside the security room, footage revealed something chilling. The East Wing cameras had been manually disabled. Override code entered from Luca's authorization panel. Matteo stared at the screen. There it was. Not suspicion. Not theory. Proof. Arya stood beside him, hand resting lightly on the console to steady herself. What will you do? She asked quietly. Matteo didn't hesitate. I end this tonight. He reached for his phone and sent a single encrypted command to loyal operatives. Lock down the estate. Seal all exits. Detain Luca Romano. But when security reached Luca's office, it was empty. Desk cleared. Computer wiped. Window open. He had anticipated exposure and vanished before the blade could fall. Matteo stood in the center of the office, fury no longer controlled. Not explosive. Focused. He won't run far, he said coldly. Arya met his gaze. He won't run, she corrected. He'll retaliate. Outside the estate walls, engines roared to life in the distance. The war was no longer hidden behind contracts. It was open, personal, and Luca Romano had just made his final move. The rain started just after midnight, heavy, relentless, turning the private airstrip outside Naples into a slick sheet of reflected light. Matteo stood in the operations room watching satellite feeds track a convoy heading south. Luca wasn't fleeing the country. He was heading toward one of the old De Luca cargo strips, a place he knew security patterns by heart. He's not running, Arya said quietly beside him. No, Matteo agreed, he's staging. A final statement, a final disruption. Matteo turned to his security chief. Minimal team, no sirens, we contain him quietly. And Arya? The chief asked. She stays here, Matteo said firmly. Arya's jaw tightened. I'm not hiding while someone hunts me. This isn't about pride. It's about leverage, she shot back. You said I was leverage. If he wants to destabilize you, he'll use me. Matteo hesitated. She wasn't wrong. Fine, he said finally. You stay in the armored vehicle. You do not step out. The convoy reached the airstrip within minutes. Floodlights flickered against sheets of rain. A private jet idled at the far end of the runway. Luca stood near the boarding stairs, coat soaked, posture still composed. He didn't look surprised when Matteo stepped from the vehicle. I wondered how long it would take, Luca called out calmly. Matteo stopped several feet away. Longer than it should have. Luca smiled faintly. Grief makes men predictable. You forged the contract. Yes. You redirected security the night of the ambush. Yes. The admission landed heavy in the rain. Arya stepped out of the vehicle despite instructions. Matteo glanced back sharply but didn't order her away. Why? She demanded. Luca's gaze shifted to her. Because empires stagnate without pressure, he said smoothly. Your families were complacent. I introduced necessity. You killed his mother, Arya said. I removed weakness. Matteo's restraint snapped not explosively, but decisively. You used me. I shaped you, Luca corrected. The jet engines roared louder. Behind Luca, two armed men shifted uneasily. You built your empire on my counsel, Luca continued. You owe your strength to the war I engineered. I built it despite you, Matteo replied coldly. A gunshot cracked suddenly. One of Luca's men fired toward Matteo. Time fractured. Arya saw the flash first. Matteo. He turned instinctively, but not fast enough. The bullet tore through his shoulder. He staggered back. Arya moved without thinking, stepping directly in front of him as additional shots rang out. Security returned fire. Chaos exploded across the runway. Luca grabbed Arya's arm violently, pulling her backward toward the jet. You're my insurance, he hissed. She fought, twisting hard, driving her elbow into his ribs. He tightened his grip. Matteo, blood soaking through his shirt, forced himself upright. Let her go, he roared. Luca aimed his weapon at her chest. Drop it, he ordered Matteo, or she dies. The rain blurred everything. Matteo didn't hesitate. He lowered his weapon slowly. Arya's breath came fast, but her voice didn't shake. You lose, she told Luca quietly. He frowned slightly. How? Because you finally stepped into the light. Behind him, sirens approached, not local police. International task force units Matteo had alerted hours earlier. The rival New York syndicate Luca had secretly partnered with had already been exposed through intercepted communications. Luca's leverage was collapsing in real time. His eyes darkened. In desperation, he pulled the trigger. Another shot cracked, but Matteo had moved. The bullet struck him squarely in the chest, body armor absorbing most of the impact but driving him to his knees. Security tackled Luca to the ground seconds later. The jet engines powered down. Rain swallowed the silence that followed. Arya dropped beside Matteo. Blood mixed with rainwater across the tarmac. "Stay with me," she whispered fiercely. He looked up at her not as a king, as a man who had almost lost everything. "I told you," he breathed roughly. "I don't hurt what I claim." Her hand trembled against his face. "Don't you dare make that your last line." Sirens grew louder. Luca was dragged away in restraints, expression no longer composed, only furious. The war that began with forged ink ended in rain and gunfire. But its consequences were just beginning. Hospitals smell like memory. Matteo woke to white ceilings and steady beeping monitors. His shoulder was bandaged, his ribs bruised, his chest aching where the armor absorbed impact. But he was alive. Arya sat beside him, eyes red from exhaustion yet steady. "You look terrible," she said softly. He managed a faint smirk. "You've seen worse." Silence settled between them, different now. Not tense. Real. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "About what?" "Revenge being strength." She watched him carefully. "You built an empire." "Yes. And nearly lost yourself in it." He didn't argue. Instead, he reached for her hand. "I don't want to rule through fear anymore." "That's ambitious," she replied gently. "It's necessary." The door opened. An officer entered with documents. "Romano is in federal custody," he reported. "Multiple charges. International conspiracy." Matteo nodded once. "And the rival syndicate?" "Negotiating." When the officer left, Matteo leaned back slowly. "For years I thought power meant eliminating enemies. And now? Now I think it means choosing which battles deserve to exist." Arya studied him. "This isn't weakness," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's clarity." She hesitated before speaking again. "There's something else." His gaze sharpened. "I'm pregnant." The words hung softly in the sterile room. Matteo stared at her, emotion flickering across his face in rapid succession. Disbelief, fear, wonder. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Silence followed, but not the heavy kind. The transformative kind. He exhaled slowly, eyes closing for a brief moment. "All this time," he murmured, "I was fighting ghosts." She squeezed his hand gently. "You don't have to anymore." Outside the hospital window, morning light began breaking through clouds. The De Luca estate would need restructuring, alliances renegotiated, leadership recalibrated. But something fundamental had shifted. Matteo didn't want to inherit a throne built on vengeance for his child. He wanted stability, not softness, strength without cruelty. Later that week, he addressed his inner circle. "Romano's era is over," he stated firmly. "We transition operations toward legitimate holdings. Ports, logistics, infrastructure." Murmurs filled the room. "This weakens us," one advisor warned. "No," Matteo corrected calmly. "It protects us." He glanced briefly toward Arya, standing at the back of the hall. "This family will not survive another war fueled by pride." Outside the estate walls, whispers spread rapidly. The Mafia King had survived betrayal. But more shocking, he was choosing reform. And somewhere in New York, a rival syndicate leader closed a file labeled, "De Luca heir pending." He smiled faintly. Peace, in their world, was rarely permanent. But for the first time in years, Matteo De Luca wasn't preparing for revenge. He was preparing for a future. And that was far more dangerous to anyone who thrived on chaos. Power never leaves politely. It lingers, it resists, it waits for weakness. 2 weeks after the airstrip, the De Luca estate felt stable on the surface. Luca Romano was in federal custody. Financial audits were underway. Public statements framed the transition as strategic restructuring. But beneath the calm, pressure built. Matteo stood in the strategy room, reviewing reports from New York. "They're testing us," his security chief said. "Minor shipment delays, quiet interference." "Not attacks?" Matteo asked. "Not yet." Matteo nodded slowly. They were probing. Seeing whether his pivot toward legitimacy signaled vulnerability. Across the room, Arya reviewed architectural plans for converting one of the older port facilities into a civilian logistics hub. You can't dismantle everything at once, she said without looking up. I'm not dismantling, Matteo replied. I'm redirecting. She raised an eyebrow. Carefully. He gave a faint nod. Carefully had become his new doctrine. That evening, a package arrived at the estate with no return address. Security scanned it, cleared it. Inside was a single photograph. Matteo at 14, standing at his mother's funeral. On the back, written in ink, "History repeats." Arya's breath caught when she saw it. "He's still reaching," she said quietly. "Luca, even behind bars." Matteo studied the handwriting. Not Luca's. Too polished. "This isn't him," Matteo said. "It's someone aligned with him. The New York Syndicate. They hadn't abandoned the investment. They were escalating psychologically." Later that night, Matteo received a secure call. "You've changed your posture," a distorted voice observed. "I've evolved," Matteo replied evenly. "Peace doesn't impress us." "It's not for you." A soft chuckle crackled through the line. "You think legitimacy protects you?" "No," Matteo said calmly, "but it limits you." Silence followed. "You're forgetting something," the voice continued. "Romano wasn't the only one who preferred war." The call ended. Matteo lowered the phone slowly. The threat wasn't immediate violence. It was destabilization, internal fractures, fear. Arya entered the room quietly. "They won't stop," she said. "No." "Then why not strike first?" He studied her carefully. "Because that's what they expect." He stepped closer. "If I respond with aggression, I validate their narrative. I become predictable again." "And unpredictability is power," she murmured. "Yes." He reached for her hand, resting it gently over her stomach. "This isn't about dominance anymore. It's about survival," she finished. He nodded. But survival required strength. And strength required demonstration. 2 nights later, a warehouse owned by a DeLuca subsidiary was set ablaze. No casualties. Intentional. A warning. Matteo stood before the smoldering remains at dawn. Reporters waited behind barricades. Instead of deflecting, he stepped forward publicly. "This is what instability looks like," he said into the microphones. "We are transitioning toward legitimate operations. Those who profit from chaos will resist." His transparency unsettled the underground. Because secrecy had always been their shield, and he was dismantling it deliberately. Behind closed doors, rival leaders began recalculating. A mafia boss inviting oversight? Dangerous. Not weak. Dangerous. Back at the estate, Arya watched the broadcast. "You're rewriting the rules," she said softly when he returned. "Yes. And if they refuse to play by them?" His gaze hardened slightly. "Then I remind them I still know the old ones." That night, Matteo visited Luca in custody. The meeting room was stark and silent. Luca looked thinner but not defeated. "You look different," Luca observed calmly. "Clearer," Matteo replied. "You think this is over?" "It is for you." Luca smiled faintly. "You removed me, but you didn't remove the system that created me." "I'm working on that." Luca leaned back. "You're going soft." "No," Matteo said evenly. "I'm going strategic." A flicker of irritation crossed Luca's face. "You needed me," he said quietly. "I needed truth," Matteo corrected. As guards escorted him out, Luca called after him. "You'll miss war when peace makes you irrelevant." Matteo didn't respond. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't driven by the need to prove himself. He was driven by something steadier. Responsibility. The DeLuca estate no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like transition. Construction crews moved through older wings, converting secure rooms into administrative offices for legitimate trade operations. Port contracts were renegotiated under government compliance frameworks. Some allies withdrew. Others leaned in. Matteo stood on the balcony overlooking the sea, hands resting lightly on the railing. Arya joined him, moving slower now as her pregnancy progressed. "You're quieter lately," she observed. "I'm thinking long term." "That's new." He gave a faint smile. "Yes." Below them, shipments moved efficiently through the harbor, now partially under civilian oversight. He had retained enough influence to protect the family, but not enough to dominate unchecked. Balance, a word he once dismissed as weakness. Now it felt like survival. A secure report arrived from New York that afternoon. The rival syndicate had redirected operations elsewhere. Not defeated, but disinterested. For now. Matteo read the report carefully. They're backing off, Arya said. They're observing, he corrected. And that's different? Yes. He turned toward her. In this world, silence is never surrender. It's patience. She studied him. You've learned that the hard way. Yes. A moment passed between them, not heavy, not tense. Steady. I was thinking about names, she said softly. For the baby? Yes. He exhaled slowly. My mother always wanted something simple, he said. Strong. Not symbolic. She smiled faintly. Not named after revenge? No. They stood together in silence, the wind carrying salt and possibility. That evening, Matteo addressed the remaining core members of the DeLuca network. We adapt, he said firmly, or we become relics. A few resisted. One elder advisor stood. Our strength was fear. Our strength, Matteo corrected calmly, was unity. He let the word settle. Fear isolates, unity endures. It wasn't sentimental. It was strategic. Because isolated empires fracture. Unified ones evolve. After the meeting, Arya approached him quietly. You sounded like a different man. I am. Do you miss who you were? He considered that carefully. I understand him, he said finally, but I don't need him anymore. She reached for his hand. Good. Weeks later, as dusk settled over the estate, Matteo received one final message from an unknown number. Power always demands sacrifice. He stared at it briefly, then deleted it, because sacrifice no longer meant blood. It meant ego. It meant relinquishing control where control destroyed. He stepped back onto the balcony where Arya waited. Inside, the nursery room was nearly complete. Soft, neutral colors, no symbols of empire, just space. For the first time, she said quietly, this place feels like a home. He looked around the estate once defined by defense systems and strategy rooms, now layered with something unfamiliar. Future. The legacy we choose, he said softly, is more powerful than the one we inherit. Below them, the sea moved endlessly against the cliffs. Not violent, not gentle, persistent. Matteo De Luca had once believed legacy was carved through domination. Now he understood. Legacy was built through decision. And for the first time since the sirens shattered his childhood, he wasn't preparing for war. He was preparing for fatherhood. But in their world, peace was never permanent, only protected. And this time, he intended to protect it differently.